Alright. Hello everybody and welcome to another StarCraft 2 video. Today we are going to be talking about why the most recent StarCraft 2 patch has failed. The previous patch came out in August 2020, and this here is coming almost 2 years later. Despite that, this patch is so lacking in ambition, and is probably the most minor tweaks we've ever seen after waiting 2 years for a balance patch. Now, the changes themselves aren't actually bad. I really like these changes. I think they're fantastic, but they are all very small nudges that should be complementary to some bigger changes that are a little bit more fundamental and really address the core problems. So in this video, I'm going to explain, first of all, well, what are those core problems in StarCraft 2 right now? Zerg vs Protoss. I'm also going to be reviewing the changes and what it's affected so far in the balance. It's been a couple of weeks, and we're going to look at some of the matches that have been played right after the balance patch came out. We're also going to talk about the current patching method and why it is simply, by design, always going to lead to patches that are far too conservative. And then finally, I will propose some more drastic and dangerous changes that would do a lot more to shake up the meta. Alright, so what is the problem? The problem is that a lot of Protoss players do not have faith in playing ground against Zerg. This is where a lot of this is rooted, alright? So this is kind of a root cause, and then we're going to lead into what that gets to. They basically think Ravagers are too strong, they break force fields, they morph instantly and can stop almost any all-in from Protoss very well. Banelings are also far too supply efficient and useful against Stalkers, Colossus, everything. Even with multiple Baneling nerfs, the Banelings still are a big obstacle for Protoss players playing ground. ZVP late game is also incredibly static and defensive. It's just too much of a defensive advantage with both Broodlords and Spore Crawlers, Infestors and Vipers for the Zerg, and Carriers and High Templar and Disruptors, not to mention Tempests for the Protoss. Neither side wants to move out and attack each other if you get to super late game. And that brings us to this game here, where we can see, of course, the end result of many months of Protoss players figuring out how to avoid playing ground, make nothing but Void Rays, resulting in Rogue punching his desk and accidentally pausing in the middle of a tournament game because he was so pissed off. This was a kind of hilarious moment, but there was a very big underlying issue, and a lot of Zerg pros said, hey, we feel the same thing as Rogue here. This is really frustrating. The Protoss players mastered how to defend just about anything with Void Rays, how to get up to the 10-minute mark, take a really fast third, really fast fourth. Felt like for the Zergs, they've also, the Protoss doesn't need to react to anything. Watching as an observer and caster, it felt like the games were very similar. Always, safe third, safe fourth, build Void Rays, build Disruptors, and it was always leading into this 10-minute timing, you'll hear the pros call it. Basically, the Protoss would max out with some Carriers, some Disruptors, some Void Rays, some Zealots, some Archons, and there was this really powerful attack which was often finishing the game. Okay, so obviously a lack of interaction is not very interesting. The Zerg players felt they couldn't break the Protoss players. There was a reason why the last months, it got to the point where the Protoss players refined it so much. I must have watched 50 games of Max, 50 games of Zest, doing that exact same style that resulted in that push that we just watched. And it isn't just the Zerg pros viewpoint, it was not interesting to watch. Pros, Protoss Zergs, many have agreed it was not that exciting. The Protoss players felt forced to play air into this very turtley style, and it was either hit that 1 10-minute timing and get a win, which looked overpowered when the Zergs didn't deal with it right, but it doesn't matter whether that timing was overpowered, it was boring to watch. And the alternate to that timing was going to a 45-minute gruel fest where not much happened. So thankfully, Blizzard did come out with this patch, and looking at the patch notes, there was two key ones aimed at this problem. Number one was, let's make sure the Queen can't transfuse off creep. And that is because I didn't show you guys any footage of it, but basically Zergs were answering this by trying to just all-in Protoss players by walking Queens across the map. And they said, well, that's also a very boring all-in trying to stop the Void Rays. Let's take that out of the game. Because the Protoss players were saying, hey, we'd like to open up with just an Oracle or two and swap into ground, but we can't even use the Oracles to help us defend because they just walk a few Queens across and the Roaches, the Ravagers, the Zerglings overwhelmed. So by removing this, the aim is, of course, to open up the ability to play ground after a Stargate opening. Also, the Void Rays were nerfed, so just massing Void Rays as this one-size-fits-all unit that you would mass up and could always allow you to survive into the late game. They've nerfed the build speed and the mineral cost, reverting basically a few of these things which were buffed in the most recent patch before, back in August 2020. All right, so let's take a look at how this actually went down in tournament play. Right after the patch came out, immediately we had GSL games, and we started off here with this hot mess, which was obviously a proxy 2 Stargate Tempest, classic, a very creative player, abusing one of the GSL special maps, Roughneck with this very dirty proxy. But DRG walked his Queens off creep. We were flabbergasted. We were like, what's he doing, man? You can't go off creep with those. They can't transfuse.
거기까지 가서 알았어요.
The queens couldn't transfuse.
들어오고 있는데 애들이 만화를 쓸 생각을 안 해가지고
Oh, I didn't even notice that. I kept trying to transfuse my queens and I noticed later.
좋구나 싶었어요.
Oh, that's right, it's a patch, so that's why I couldn't do it.
He literally forgot there was a patch. Oh my god. DRGY. All right, going into the next series, we saw Dark vs. Classic. And what was really cool about this series is Dark literally did the exact same style that he played before the patch, as you'd expect, only a week into it, hadn't really developed new styles. But it was up against Classic, who was playing the exact same styles as well. So Classic was like, I'm just going to make Void Rays into Disruptors and Sky Toss. Nothing changes. My Void Rays are just slightly more expensive. Dark did the exact same Chadray Annihilator build. This was one of his very first solutions to the Void Ray meta. In 2020, I was casting him doing this. And he's brought it back. He always rotates it in every now and then. It's just a surprise Queenling Nidus. Nothing's really changed. Obviously, he does have to keep leapfrogging these Niduses forward to make sure he has creep. He can't go too far off creep with them, so it's a little more awkward. But essentially, he just catches him off guard with a Nidus all in. Classic didn't scout his main. Not the most interesting game. Now, what I did find more interesting is in Game 2, Classic once again played the exact same style. And Dark here went for basically just a big Queen Ravager Lingwalk. This is one of his favorite styles from before the patch. The difference is he just used a Nidus Worm to get those queens out across the map. So Dark really played Game 1 and Game 2 where he's like, yeah, instead of walking the queens across, I just Nidus them. It's the exact same style. You're playing the same, I'm playing the same. I just need to do it slightly later with a Nidus Worm, but your Void Rays are more expensive. It kind of cancels out. Now, what was cool is this was not actually an all-in. This was kind of a fake out by Dark. He was actually droning up 4 bases and swapping into Mutas behind it, but he forced a really big response, the Nidus Screech scaring the heck out of Classic, and he just swapped into Mass Muta, one of the common ways to overwhelm a Skytoss player. If you could surprise them with a big wave of Mutas, not give them a chance to get the Phoenix out, you could win the game this way as well. So players have mentioned that, hey, also, rather than using the Nidus Worm, you can actually bring a drone across. So even if you want to do a very early Queen Walk, as long as you can save up 300 minerals, so by the time your queens get to the other side, get outside the Protoss third base, what you can do is you can walk the queens over, bring a drone, build a hatchery, and when you cancel that hatchery, there's a little bit of creep underneath, throw a creep tumor down, that creep spreads very quickly, you can transfuse. You're still doing a very early Queen Walk. Costs you a little bit more. You gotta have 300 minerals. That's not cheap, right? Even though you cancel it and get most of the money back, floating that 300 minerals is delaying roaches and lings rallying in. On the other hand, the Void Rays are also more expensive. So once again, it feels like, to me, the same dynamics there. However, disagreeing with me is Creator, a guy who is so reliant on these Void Ray openings. This is the guy who gets really good whenever balance stays the same for a long time because he's a slow burn player that really refines his defensive strategies. This is what he had to say about the patch.
In the perspective of amateur Zerg players, this balance might seem fair to them. So I do understand a bit. But I'm a pro gamer and I have to play in matches, competitive matches. So currently, I think the balance is not in the right position. It should be fixed.
All right, so I totally get where Creator's coming from. Guy who likes massing Void Rays get nerfed, doesn't like it, feels like it's not good for Protoss. So I reached out to a lot of different pro gamers for their perspectives. Neeb had a really interesting one, which a few people echoed, but he had the most emphatic view that nothing has changed. And Neeb said, look, Void Rays are more expensive, they take longer to build. The Queen Walks can't hit as easily or as fast. They're both nerfed about equally, and you know what? It cancels out. Queen Walks can still happen just slightly later with a Nidus Worm, or a Hatch cancel, or Overlords dropping creep. And you can still go Void Rays. They just build up slightly slower, but the only thing that could punish that is the Queens early on, and it cancels out. So Neeb is of the opinion that actually, no, this is completely cancelling out. These changes are so conservative, and both sides are changed, that it really doesn't change much at all. A lot of Zergs in Europe and Max Packs as well I was talking to, and they actually said, well, wait, no, Pig. It's not just about the Queen Walks, it's also the Queen Corruptor push, which was already a favorite strategy of Solar and a few other Zergs a few months back. And it's so much stronger now, because at that stage of the game, having some creep dropping out of Overlords costs you almost nothing. You've probably already got Overlord speed at that point. So you can walk your Queens across, bring your Corruptors, and those Void Rays just cannot hold it off. It used to be a very close fight, because the Corruptors would outnumber, but there'd be like Void Rays with Prismatic Alignment, Shield Battery, Cannon. But now with the Void Rays costing more, apparently it's dominating. This is what I'm hearing from the pros, the Corruptor Queen timing, smashing these Void Ray styles. Now, the reason why I don't think that's a great argument for creators' viewpoint and these Protoss saying, oh, you just can't play Void Rays anymore is, well, yeah, okay, if you just build Void Rays without reacting to anything, sure. But that is one of the most one-dimensional pushes from the Zerg, the Corruptor Queen push. And it is specifically focused on countering you if you're just doing nothing but building Void Rays off 2 or 3 Stargates and really not doing anything else. But if we think about it, if Queen walks are delayed a little bit as well, I really feel like Protoss players can very well start just playing more ground styles and going faster into ground off just a couple of Void Rays. I'm going to be reaching out to pros and asking their opinions on this because I feel like, you know, they're so wrapped up in the meta of, oh, that thing from before the patch now beats me playing the exact same way from before the patch. But I do think Protoss players are even going to have an even easier time of getting into ground play, and therefore it's going to balance out. And what I'm afraid of, and a few Zergs have voiced, is that we very well may go back to rushing towards, oh, I get a few Void Rays, I take a quick 4th base with Disruptors, adding Archon, Zealots, ground units. I'm at the 10-minute mark, you're at the 10-minute mark, we've both gone to late game, neither player can really do much to the other, and it's still got that uninteractive environment, that uninteractive early game where both players aren't reacting to too much in terms of scouting or moving input pieces to harass and attack each other. That creates a boring dynamic both for the players to play. They don't enjoy it because they feel that worse players can beat them when there's not a lot of action going on. You don't get to differentiate your skill, and it's much more boring for the viewers to watch at home. Lambo and a few other Zergs actually expressed this. They said, okay, I am actually still really worried that Protoss players will just find a way to still get that super fast 4th up off some Void Rays, get to carriers, and, you know, bam, 10-minute timing's happening again. The whole early game still doesn't have interaction. So this is a very real fear that a few of the Zergs have said, you know, we're hoping that by agreeing to have our Queen transfuse off creep nerfed, we're hoping we haven't shot ourselves in the ass with this. Okay, so these changes seem to have shaken things up a little bit. However, the real problem with ZVP, I really think, is not just these openings and the 10-minute timings, but it's also the fact that when the games go longer, they're also very uninteractive. So I like these tweaks for shaking up the early stages and trying to get different openings and more interaction, and hopefully we can find things. But I also think that because the late game is so super turtly, that is part of the problem. I think a great example of the uninteractive nature of it was Serral vs. Trap in the Pigsty Festival tournament that I ran over on my channel late last year. It ended up being a 3-hour best of 7, and to be fair, for hardcore fans, one of the most epic displays of StarCraft skill that we've seen in the late game, patience and technicality. So it really felt like in this series, we saw the ultimate patient nature of what ZVP incentivizes, and none of the changes are going to change anything in this late game scenario. The Void Rays are going to be slightly more expensive. Doesn't change much. Queen's not being able to transfuse off creep doesn't change anything in this late game. And I think it's similarly going to reward the player who is simply more patient and defensive, and it's still going to be a grind fest of slowly clearing creep, building static defense forward, and trying to kind of bait the opponent into making mistakes. And usually that mistake is literally just attacking. And I can't think of a situation worse in StarCraft than consistently punishing the player that's actually making exciting, aggressive plays. When that becomes the norm, and pro players feel like, oh, I'm only going to be rewarded if I defend all game, making aggressive plays is always going to get punished, that's where the matchup gets really boring for both pros and for us viewers at home watching. I think we can handle bigger and more experimental changes. Look, people are going to get angry about it, but they get angry. I saw people getting angry about this patch, and it's one of the most small, tweaky patches I've ever seen in StarCraft's history. I think we want to reset the meta a little bit. I think we want to break some eggs, bring some fresh strategies in. Yes, make a little bit of a mess of it, and people will get upset, and we will not have a consensus, and pros will shout. But I think we can definitely handle it, and it'll make the game much more interesting both to play and watch. And if we can just start by aiming to do this in Zerg vs. Protoss specifically, I think this would be so healthy for the game. The big problem standing in the way of this right now is the fact that to get these patches going, obviously StarCraft's in the classic games department now, and they've basically said, hey, some of the employees got all of the pro gamers in one big group chat where they discuss balance, the main problems, what they think could fix them, and they try to come to a consensus. Now, there's a problem there, and that is that I've just said consensus and group chat with every single pro gamer in it all in one sentence. And these things are antithetical for obvious reasons. It's not because pros are idiots and they're self-interested assholes. It is because simply you're playing different races, you've got different opinions. It's so hard just to get 4 or 5 players of one race to agree on a balance change. Yeah, 40 pro gamers, 50 pro gamers. I'm not sure how many are in the chat, but there's a lot of pro gamers out there, all different races, all different subjective viewpoints. Getting them to agree on something is so insanely hard, and that is why we're naturally going to have a risk-averse set of changes coming through as long as this is the method through which the patch changes are come about. I get why they do it this way. It makes sense, right? Because you're making sure you don't have a Blizzard employee who's maybe a Diamond player or something like that coming up with changes which they don't fully understand the repercussions of. So you do avoid really like heinous game-breaking changes that should never have gone through. On the other hand, you're never going to really rock the boat at all, and you're never going to be taking risks because the system in its own way, it's just basically designed to just continue with the status quo, and it's going to be very hard to shake up the status quo. And because of the way things are, even when pros think they're being fair, there's usually, I think, going to be a tendency towards maintaining the current state of things. Even when pros think something is a drastic change that'll make a big difference, I think because their face is so close to the problem, they're naturally going to be just super conservative, and it's not really them being like, oh, I don't want to give away the advantages my race has. It's really just something where they're too close to the problem, and so they see even very minor changes as having massive implications. So I really believe, and I want to propose, that we actually need a new David Kim. Now, I know that sounds kind of crazy. David Kim, for those who don't know, if you've only been in StarCraft 2 in the last few years, was very famous because he was the head balance designer through the early and mid years of StarCraft 2. And one of the sweetest guys out there who'd always be like, I hear your concerns. Listen patiently to everyone's feedback, whether in person, on forums, and interviews. And then he'd go ahead and do what he was going to do anyway. And it wasn't just him. There was a whole team, of course, that was responsible for it. But he was kind of the lightning rod, where everyone would be like, oh, this change is so bad. David Kim, we hate you. You need to fix this. I can't believe you did this. And obviously, there was a crazy amount of rage and hatred and vitriol. But I think what was great is that we still saw really big changes. And even after David Kim left the team, I think we kept continuing seeing that same thing of a balance team that said, hey, we hear you, we listen to you, we appreciate, here are our thoughts. And they got really good over the years at communicating, hey, these are our thoughts, this is what we're trying to do, and we're going to address it, we're going to change it and tweak it if it doesn't do what we expected. And then they'd go ahead and do these crazy changes no matter what. And I think we need the willingness to do that and to piss off some people, break some eggs, have some pro gamers say, what are they doing? They don't know what they're doing. And I think it's just better for the game. But of course, no one wants to take that risk. The thing is, you can't keep everyone happy. But a game like StarCraft 2 is so damned complex that even when you do make game-breaking changes, it actually isn't as bad as you think. A lot of people are going, what the hell are you talking about, Pig? Think about Swarm hosts in Heart of the Swarm. Think about Broodlord Infestor. Think about the blink on all those terrible maps in early Heart of the Swarm where Terran players just could not defend blink all-ins. It was disgusting. Let me tell you guys a story of something else that was completely broken, but as long as you have semi-regular patches, never gets to be too problematic. And that is the story of Burrowed Fungal. Now, Burrowed Fungal actually was brought in 2017. And what is Burrowed Fungal? Well, Fungal Growth and Infestor spell, they made the radius bigger. They made it so it doesn't root units in place. It just slows them massively, does a little bit less damage. They've nerfed it over the years. But in 2017, they said, you know what's a cool idea? No one's using Infestors because we nerfed it so many times. Why don't we make it so they can cast it while underground? Small problem, you're doing a giant AoE that is especially lethal versus Terran who play Bioverse Zerg, Marines that massively clump up. You could hit about 40 Marines with one Fungal. And you're doing this with an invisible unit that's tracking the Terran who, by the way, Terran have terrible detection. They already struggle with tracking observers and figuring out where they are. So the moment they announced this patch, said this is so broken. There's no way they should put this through. It's so silly. It's so overpowered, especially in Zerg versus Terran. This is absolutely nuts. Nobody listened to me. A lot of people told me, you're wrong, Pig. No one uses Infestors. They need to make them better. And I said, you guys are, I get it. Buff them a little bit, not this. This is so unfair. Late game ZVT especially, Infestors are going to be able to just pop up. Oh, wait, sorry. They don't even need to pop up. They literally could just be following a Terran army and then just fungal it as your Lingbane Ultra engages and you just wipe an army. It's super unfair. Yet despite me saying this, playing it on my stream, getting a lovely highlight reel, which I wish I could find because I'd show you clips of it right now, but I literally just went hunting and it's all lost in the sands of time. But despite that, I didn't see any pro players actually use this until 9 months after the patch hit. Like literally just people like, oh no, you can't afford Infestors. And it was something like 9 months after the patch hit. I think it was Dark fell way behind in a Zerg versus Terran. And then like he built some desperation infestors and did like some of the craziest fungals, killed like 80 supply of Terran, and made this disgustingly unfair comeback where he was so dead. And I was like, oh. And suddenly everyone's eyes open and they went, this is really good. And we had a few months of like, if the game got kind of late enough that the Zerg could squeeze a few infestors out, there was always the chance of a Zerg comeback. And the Terrans were just like so afraid of just, is there an infest here? They'd just be dropping random scans. They'd be trying to spread their units out so they're not moving around the map in a big clump because so many times they were getting ambushed. It was a traumatic time for Terran players. But what made it not so bad is that they patched it after just a few months because there was end of year after the World Championships. They'd always do a big balance patch and they said, oh yeah, this has been really broken the last few months. Bam, reverted it. Just like that. And they fixed it. And I was like, that's good, because there was only really a few months where it got really bad. And this was one of the most blatant examples where day one I read the patch note and went, that broken, that's so broken. And I'm one of the most conservative people when it comes to calling something broken. I'm normally like, oh yeah, no, Ultralisk now has 2,000 hit points. Yeah, we'll have to see how that works out. Like, I am so loose on that. If I'm calling it broken on day one, you guys know it is super, super just beyond the pale ridiculous. So my point here is it takes players a long time to figure out that something's broken, even when it is. Day one, everyone thinks things are broken, and then they figure out, no, it isn't, and they think something else is broken, and then they go, no, it isn't. The important thing is that if you do break a few eggs in StarCraft, the thing that happens is the things that are actually super, super abusive, it takes a long time to figure out, and as long as you're patching on a regular basis, at least once a year, and you can revert that, it's not going to completely destroy the pro scene or anything like that. And there's so many variety of strategies and options in StarCraft. There's always a way to work your way around that problem, even at pro level, where yes, there will be some very heated feedback and complaints. All right, guys, now obviously I can't just say, make bigger changes, please, Blizzard. And we got to actually throw out some suggestions of my own. So this brings us to the most controversial part of the video. So warm up your keyboard fingers. I know you're all about to shout at me because I'm going to tell you I want to nerf a few of your favorite toys on both sides. Zerg and Protoss players, get ready to get angry. So my suggestion is to try and make the game more interactive, and I think I would keep all the changes we've just had. I think they're all good changes. I just don't think they're enough. I'm still absolutely sticking by this message, guys. I think that the patch has failed just because it's too conservative. I'm not saying take away these changes, I'm saying keep them, but add more. My first changes are based on Neeb saying, you know what, he said the game is basically exactly the same post-patch. I think late game, you need to try and break the stalemate a little bit, make it more interesting. He said I'd nerf the carrier and the Broodlord. I'm not sure how, but I'd do that. So I did a bit of brainstorming and I said to myself, you know what would be great, guys, is if we can change the damage point of the Broodlord. That is the time it takes to shoot. At the moment, it's almost instant. You can tell a Broodlord to attack and then run away. And the shot doesn't actually fire straight away because the Broodling takes a second to shoot, but it does fire off. And essentially you can then turn again, shoot, and then keep moving. So what happens is at pro level, if you're fighting ground with Broodlords, the Broodlords can basically spend an entire fight running away, making it so the ground army can't really get underneath and hit them, while shooting pretty much non-stop. Zero loss to their DPS. So what I propose is doubling the damage point, how long it takes for them, so they need to actually sit and stare, or maybe even quadrupling, I don't know the exact numbers, but basically making it so they actually have to look at their target for like a full half a second or so to shoot and then run. So it's more of like a normal unit starter step where it's shoot, move, shoot, move, whereas at the moment it feels like Broodlords are almost all moving and very little stopping to shooting at top pro level. For average Joes who don't micro their Broodlords, you'd still have the exact same damage output for your Broodlords. They'd still shoot just as frequently. And because you're not starter stepping them, it changes nothing. But at top level, it means the Broodlords would be just a little bit less elusive. So when Stalkers blink underneath them and that sort of thing, they can't just fade away as smoothly. Archons might be able to get underneath them a little bit better, as well as things like Marines. And for Protoss, on the other hand, the counter to this change is I'd actually like to nerf the hit points and shields of interceptors. I think one of the most annoying things about carriers is the fact that if you don't target them down, no matter what you've got, unless you've got 100 Spore Crawlers in a fight or 4,000 Hydralisks versus like 3 carriers, the interceptors just take so long to die. They cost so little and the Protoss just flies away, rebuilds them, and comes back later. So because they have 40 hit points and 40 shields, I want to reduce those to 30 hit points, 30 shields, just so that you're fighting against Corruptors, the main counter to carriers. It's the exact same dynamic. The Corruptors are going to focus the carriers. They're not going to be shooting the interceptors. Nothing changes. But when you're fighting against Hydras, something that are dominated by carriers, especially when you account for things like Storm and Colossus supporting them, it's going to be a little bit easier for Queens, Hydras, those units that just A-move and try to fight the carriers by shooting down the interceptors are going to have a bit of an easier time of gunning them down. The interceptors aren't going to create such a cloud of just ridiculous tankiness like they do at the moment. Now, also talking to MaxPax, he was not happy with these changes, and he said, look, I really feel like because of the Corruptor Queen timings being so good right now, and I already said I'm not sure if that's going to be as impactful once players adjust to the meta. I'm a little bit critical of that, yet despite that, he said, I wish Sentry Stalker was a bit stronger. And this does bring me to a point which I agree with. I think that the Ravager countering the Sentry, while being very necessary for Zerg, is a little bit too accessible. I don't want to make Sentries infinitely more powerful and go back to Zergs just being force fielded away so they can't engage, but I also feel like we could make it so the Ravager is just a little bit more of a commitment and less of a get out of jail free card. So to do this, I'm not going to change any of the stats. All I would change is the Ravager morph time. So if you don't scout at all as the Zerg, Protoss player arrives at your base and you morph Ravagers, you can't just bam, 9 seconds later, you got 10, 12 Ravagers, you defend they're all in. You need to scout it a little bit ahead of time because I want to raise that from 9-second morph time to 16 seconds. This is almost double the amount of time for a Ravager to morph. But remember guys, Ravagers already have 5 armor while morphing, God knows why. You're seeing people morph Ravagers in the middle of combat and Zerg vs Zerg, and it basically becomes immune to low damage units, which I was always confused at that, and then it pops back out of full life. But you've also got, in ZVP, you just morph 12 of these, and you can just zone out and attack forever. A Sentry Stalker push is usually about controlling space, shaving off units, and it just gets shut down so hard by Ravagers. And I think by making the Ravagers just a little bit more inaccessible, you're actually going to give us surprisingly more power to Protoss to push, to get in there and to do fake pushes, and just make it so the Zerg player can't just be super greedy and make Ravagers at the last second. I think this will have an indirect impact on the power of Sentry Stalker armies and actually make them a lot better. Now, of course, with my proposal and these bigger changes in general, there is one thing I haven't talked about, guys. That problem is Blizzard. Blizzard has not been putting a lot of resources into StarCraft 2 or anything that is now categorized in their classic games department. At the moment, it might be 18 months or more between patches, and there's very little communication from Blizzard, so we don't really know. The maps aren't coming around as frequently as possible, and things like ladder bugs, so that incorrect leagues are showing for players, are not a good sign for the player base. So because of this lack of investment from Blizzard, lack of even maintenance, obviously there's a lot of people who are tending towards let's just play it safe and follow this sort of patch method. So what we really need for my criticisms to be taken on board, and because these are not aimed at the couple of guys who are very passionate guys and girls in the classic games department at Blizzard and the pro gamers who have put their heads together to come up with these changes, because I do think this is a great step in the right direction. I just want more than a step. I want Blizzard to actually commit to maintaining their games that they have huge millions of players playing every month, a massive base, one of the most hardcore communities, and a big part of the Blizzard community in the long term. We really need Blizzard to turn a new leaf, especially with Microsoft's support. We need Blizzard to turn a new leaf, start supporting these communities, and just commit to patching the game once every 6 months or a year, make some bigger changes, have someone whose full-time job it is just to do StarCraft 2 balance, one employee who takes this feedback but is also not afraid to make some slightly bigger changes because they know they can actually adjust them and fix them if something goes terribly wrong a few months down the track. And it's not, oh, it's going to be 2 years in a broken game state and we just have to be so overly careful stepping on eggshells. I don't want new assets. I don't need new co-op commanders, new anything like that. Literally, just get the maps in each season, which are already being fully sourced and done by the community. So obviously I know there's a bit of quality assurance and stuff that needs to be done by Blizzard, but get that done each season and get these patches going in frequently. And we could be so much more ambitious with changing the stats, disrupting the balance, breaking the meta, and keeping the game fresh, exciting, and interesting for so many years to come. So am I deluded? Does this patch actually strike the right balance for where StarCraft 2 is and the investment right now? Is this actually the perfect patch for right now? And we should just accept the position StarCraft 2 is being given by Blizzard and just accept small pro gamer approved and stamp changes and nothing else? Or do you guys agree with me? But maybe you have your own take on it. Please let me know in the comments section. I want to hear from everybody how you think my balance changes are stupid or great or fantastic, or how you'd add on them yourself, and what you'd like to see more from Blizzard to maintain such a big part of Blizzard's history. I think this is a great opportunity for Blizzard to rebuild some of their PR after the disasters in the last few years and to reinvent themselves with the Microsoft acquisition and say, hey, it's a natural turning point. So fingers crossed, maybe I'm being an eternal optimist and a bit too glass half full, but I think this is a great chance for Blizzard to really regain some love from the community across not just StarCraft, but by doing the same thing with a lot of their classic games. Well, thank you very much for watching, everybody. That's all for now. We'll do a follow-up video as I'm sending out these notes to all of the pro gamers that I spoke to saying, hey, what do you think of my balance changes? And I'm sure they're going to have some very interesting criticisms. So future video to come with pro gamers responding, as well as maybe some of the most interesting responses from you guys in the comment section, and maybe revisiting some of my thoughts, tweaking some of my balance suggestions, and adding some new ones. See you next time. Goodbye and good night.